Welcome back to Raised by Giants Illuminated Insights discussion. We are live. Welcome everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys and any moderators out there. We have an amazing discussion for you guys here today with author and psychotherapist Jerry Marzinsky. I first read Jerry's book back around 3 years ago, and I've wanted to have him on for a chat ever since. I've recommended his book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, to many people over the years, therapists, psychiatrists, and just people struggling with mental health. You can see how often the book has been read by how worn down the book is. And I just read it again preparing for this show. So a warm welcome to author with a BA in psychology from Temple University, a master's degree in counseling from the University of Georgia, 2 years in a PhD psychology program, retired licensed psychotherapist who worked over 35 years with schizophrenia and psychiatric patients in state hospitals, state prisons, and hospital emergency rooms. Jerry Marzinsky, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. Glad to be here.
Yes, I've read this book so many times, and it's incredible. I've recommended it to so many people to purchase it. I've let people borrow it. The link is in the description of this video. It's really, it's a page turner, right? And it gets you sucked in really quick. It's short, and there's no better time in history for us to have this discussion here. And I've been watching your shows with Jay Widener. And again, thank you so much for coming on. But for the audience that haven't read your book, what inspired you to write this book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower?
Well, what happened was after 7 years in one of the biggest, that's probably the biggest psychiatric hospital on the planet, I started noticing that the voices that these patients were hearing ran patterns, and I would ask them all kinds of questions about them. One thing that surprised me is that none of the other staff were interested in what these voices were telling these patients, and it was pretty clear to me that whatever was going on, it was driving the patient's behavior. So I was like, okay, what's going on here? What's the link? So I started asking them a lot of questions, and things started coming up, and what started coming up was patterns. Okay. Now, the first thing I needed to learn was how to talk to them about the voices, because they didn't want to talk to any kind of psych or psychiatrist or counselor about the voices. There's no positive benefit for them to do that. Every time they've done that, they got in trouble with parents. They got drugged before psychiatrists. They got drugged senseless. Their friends left thinking, oh, you're a weirdo. So that there's no positive benefit for them to be talking about the voices. So it took a while to learn how to get that information out of them. But when I did, patterns started emerging. And the first pattern was the voices were consistently negative. They weren't, you'd think if they were a hallucination, they'd be positive, negative, all over the place, in between, everywhere in between. No, they weren't. They were consistently negative. They were rotten. It was, you're no good, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're rotten, everybody hates you, the people are laughing at you, people are following you. I mean, it's all negative stuff. So my first question was, what is it that's holding whatever this thing is on a negative trajectory? It doesn't ever veer from a negative trajectory. It doesn't go to neutral, it doesn't go to positive, it doesn't go anywhere in between. It's consistently negative. Something was holding it on a consistently negative course. So that was strange. So I got in trouble with psychiatry when one patient went and said, well, this guy's asking me about the voices, and I don't like that. That upsets me. So I was ordered by psychiatry to pulled up in front of the psychiatrist's office, on the red carpet, and he was telling me, you will not ask patients about their voices. They're hallucinations. You're making them worse by asking them questions about it. You're reinforcing their delusions. And he ordered me to stop. That happened twice at Central State Hospital. Psychiatry doesn't want people looking into the voices, and they don't do it themselves. They're brainwashed in school and taught that the voices are hallucinations, and they just buy that and they leave school with that. And that, it's like, oh, well, why would they lie to me? I didn't trust them that much. So what was happening was a consistent pattern started appearing. The second one that appeared was that they were anti-religious. I had patients come to me and say, when I repeat the 23rd Psalm, the voices act like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They act up. They won't let me read the Bible. They get loud when I start reading the Bible. They get loud when I go to church. They don't want me to go to any religious activities. And it was on and on and on. So once I hear that once, I start asking all these other schizophrenic patients if the same thing happened to them. And it did. It was consistent. I asked scores of them the same questions. The voices are anti-religious. So I'm going, why would a hallucination be anti-religious? Why would a hallucination care? Why is it consistently anti-religious? So what I was doing was finding these patterns. And the deal is that if the voices are running patterns, they cannot be hallucinations, because hallucinations are random. They're all over the place. So fast forward probably 20 years, I was working in the psychology department of a large state prison, and I I found a prison reform worker, engineer who was out there trying to reform the prisons, and I met her, and I said, "Well, let me work with you. We'll see what we can do together." So here we were. I couldn't attack the system I was in, but I could help her attack the Alabama system. And they're similar. So, I'd give her an inside view. This is how they're going to view what you say. This is how they're going to react to it. So we were working together for a long time, probably 10 years. And, I was the whole time I was still, kind of experimenting with schizophrenic patients, trying to figure out what is going on in their heads. And I ran into a very unusual case. And one day when I was talking to her over the computer, I told her what the deal was. And she says, "Oh, I know all about that. I heard voices when I was a young woman and they almost killed me." And this was after 10 years of working with her. She never mentioned a word of that. And this is Sherry Sweeney. She's the co-author of this book. So I started throwing all these questions at her that only somebody who had heard the voices would know the answer to. And like, bam, 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 she was just one after the other, just knocked them off. There was no doubt that she had experienced them. She knew what they were and how they operated. And I was blown away. After 10 years of knowing her, talking to her virtually every day, she never mentioned it. So that's how much of a stigma the word schizophrenia has on people. They don't, that's a devastating label. So she didn't want to be known by that because she was never diagnosed, but she had the symptoms. So
now, you were mentioning just a few minutes ago about the religious aspect of this. Do they get upset with any religion, or is this just Christianity and the Abrahamic
no,
religion?
it's any positive religion. I've got
So Buddhism, Hinduism, any of those. If they went into a Hindu temple, it would act the same way.
well, I know with the Muslim religion, they don't like that. Now I haven't heard from any Buddhists or Hindus, but I've heard from several Muslims. They're much more aware of these negative entities, these demonic entities, than Christians are. Despite the fact that it's mentioned that Jesus threw these things out of individuals 23 times in the Bible, it's like the United States population and Canada and the Western world is kind of going, "Oh, that's just a fairy tale that happened 2,000 years ago. It has no relevance to us today." Well, we're science oriented. I mean, we know what's going on. There are no demons. It's just, that's wives' tale. Hockey, that's horse hockey. They're out there, and the most devastating trick that the devil's ever pulled was to convince the populace of this planet that he doesn't exist. that allows him to cause so much more trouble.
Yeah, I was just curious if it was just Christianity or if it was because why would these demons just be specific to one religion when there's several thousands of religions out there?
No, I know. I've heard from Jewish people, so it affects the Jews. I've heard from Muslims, um, and I've heard from people all over the Christian world. Uh, it's they don't like any positive religion. They don't want people feeling good. They don't want them feeling better.
And that would take into account not only religion but spiritual practice, right? Because you can be a spiritual individual and live a positive life without religion. So that would take into account, yoga and
Yeah,
meditation. They don't like any of that too, correct?
right. No, they can't stand it. Matter of fact, I just got back from a all expenses paid conference in Romania where the head of this yoga organization wanted his people to understand that these things exist and that they affect them. He's going, they need to wake up to the fact that these things are out there, and they don't just hit schizophrenics, they hit us all. You could be walking down the street and, you know, uh, somebody cut you off or something and you feel like killing the guy or it just comes out of nowhere. It's a negative thought to do something violent or jump off a bridge. I remember, one of the holiest preachers I ever knew. He was standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and a thought bolted into his head. Jump, just jump. And I've heard that from scores of people who were standing on bridges or driving, so going, "Why don't you just drive in oncoming traffic?" Those thoughts don't come from you. See, so that's one of the things that is really intriguing about this. These entities put those thoughts in your head. They insert them. They sound just like all the other thousands of thoughts that go through your head on a regular day, but they're not your intent. They're not your intention. They don't belong to you. And one of the biggest struggles schizophrenics have is, what are these voices? Are they me, or what are they? I mean, where do they come from? Because we're all taught from the time we're little kids that any thought that goes into your mind, it belongs to you. That's far from true. Your brain is like a radio receiver. You turn it to different channels, and wherever you tune it to, that's the stations it picks up. So you got negative and positive stations playing all the time. It's where you turn the dial to and what you choose to attend to. So schizophrenics usually have their dials jammed because the vast majority of them have been severely traumatized in some way or another, physically, sexually, emotionally. The trauma is one of the big things that crack people open and allow these things in there, because it kind of programs you to a negative program. And that's like a virus that kind of stays in your brain and kind of jams the tuner to a negative frequency.
That's one of the biggest takeaways that I took from your book since I read it around 3 years ago was, where do our thoughts come from? And I've asked several people that question, and no one really seems to know. But that, what you just said, that our thoughts are like a tuning into a radio station. We can tune into a high frequency, or we can tune into a low frequency, and depends on what station we're on, depends on the type of thoughts that we get. I think that that's really spot on.
Right. Emanuel Swedenborg, a real famous Christian mystic to live 300 years ago, he explained all that in his book, Heaven and Hell. He says that none of your thoughts are your own. You are the receiver. They all come in from outside. You're the chooser, the receiver and the chooser. So these negative entities, they speak in whatever language you speak. There's a few cases where they were speaking in some language that the patient didn't recognize. They can't take any control that way because the person doesn't understand what they're saying. So the reason that they're so negative and nasty is because they want to generate that negative emotional energy. Now, one thing I saw at the when I was working in the big state hospital was that there was a one-to-one correspondence between the voices attacking these schizophrenic patients and their energy level dropping to zero. It happened every time. And then when I moved 2,500 miles away to Arizona, I saw the same phenomena. So the voices were the same in Georgia as they are here in the mental health centers, the psych hospitals, and the prisons in Arizona, 2,500 miles away. It's almost like they're all made from the same cookie cutter in some cosmic cookie factory somewhere. They all act the same. And now that I'm working with the MACE energy method, I'm working with people all over the Western world. The voices are the same all over the planet. They run the same exact patterns all over the planet.
Almost like energy vampires, right?
They are energy vampires. They have to turn your energy level negative before they can take that energy. So they can't stand positive energy. They can't stand religion. They can't stand prayer. They can't stand the 23rd Psalm. I've had patients tell me that when they repeated the 23rd Psalm, the voices reacted like worms thrown onto a hot frying pan. They can't stand that Psalm. So it's one of the things I give them to fight back against them. They have to fight back. They can't just allow these things to take them over. And one of the biggest battles they have is trying to figure out what these voices are, because they sound just like there are thousands of thoughts that come through their mind on a regular day.
So it's their same voice. It's not a different voice.
Nope,
it's their voice that's speaking to them.
Sometimes it is, but for the vast majority, it's not. You don't hear any, where are the voices or anything like that. It sounds just like your normal thoughts, only the content is very different. Like it might tell you, hey, why don't you go up and smack that guy up in the back of the head? He's doing something you don't like. It's nothing you would do. It's nothing you would intend to do. It's not your intention. So these are entities that have an influences over your thought stream by injecting thoughts into the thought stream and trying to get you to act on them. Now, I've had hundreds of patients ask these things. Who are you? What are you? What do you think they said?
I'm you, maybe?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You. We are you. We are you. Plural. Yeah. So they want you to believe that those thoughts belong to you. If you listen to those negative thoughts, then you will become the voices. You become them. You're actually acting on their intention and not your own. And
Now,
they hit all of us, not just schizophrenics. They hit us all.
Oh yeah, I can think of some times that I've had a weird thought pop into my head as well. Now, are these voices that these schizophrenics hear, are they ever right about anything, or are they always falsities and lies? Are they ever
Well,
right?
I would say that 98% of the time they're just telling lies. All they want to do is upset you, to turn your energy negative so they can take it. So basically they're like leeches, they're parasites. Now, in some cases they're right, and in some cases they actually know what's going to happen. So there was one case, I have the transcripts here, we can read them later if you'd like, but they told this one fella, he was I met him in the prison. He was one of the patients in the prison. So what I had in the prison was a group of prisoners that were willing to tell me in real time what the voices were telling them while we were in session. So while we're talking, they'd say, the voices are saying this now. So I'd know what was happening in real time. So that was unique because I couldn't do that anywhere else. If one of the prisoners went up to the warden and said, hey, the psych is asking me all these questions that are upsetting me, the warden would just say, get out of my face, fool. I got other things to take care of. Get out of here. But the psychiatrists in the state hospital, they were getting assaulted at a rate higher than any other staff by schizophrenics in the entire hospital. They were always getting beat up. And it was like they'd only spend like 15 minutes a month with these people, and I was going, well, what are they saying to these guys where they're getting pounded by them in 15 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
It took me a few more years to figure that one out. but they were very wary of upsetting schizophrenics because they were the ones that were getting pounded. And it turned out they're getting pounded because the voices didn't like those medications. They calmed the person down. They were major tranquilizers. They didn't want that. They want him upset. They want him paranoid. They want him fearful. That generates the deluge that they feed off of.
Now, did you see any other patterns within the patients other than negativity that's being constantly pounded into their heads, the negative voices? Did you see anything else like
Oh, you bet.
age range, gender, the same stories being told?
No, but I'll run through these quickly. So basically, what the psychiatric mafia and big pharma have done is when back in the 50s they were blaming mothers for schizophrenia. That the mothers did something. They did something to their kids. They raised them wrong, or they said something bad, or it was their fault. And the mothers would go, "Hey, wait a minute, we didn't do anything. I mean, it was perfectly observable." So what they had to do was kick it up out of the range of where, with a cause that people couldn't check out for themselves. So the first one they picked is genetics. They got away with that for like a decade. Oh, it's a genetic problem. There's a schizophrenia gene or a combination of schizophrenic genes, or but here they would publish this. They would teach it in the colleges and universities, and then it took a while because most geneticists aren't interested in schizophrenia. Finally, some reasonable, honest ones did some research on it, and they said we can't find a schizophrenic gene. One doesn't exist. So they had to throw that out. But they still needed something that the general population and the vast majority of doctors and psychiatrists could not examine. Right. So Eli Lilly came up and
proverbial boogeyman right there.
Yeah. They had to kick it up where most people couldn't see it. So the second one was Eli Lilly in the 70s when they came out with Prozac. They needed some reason why their medicines worked. So they made up this chemical imbalance theory that mental illness is due to a chemical imbalance of the brain. So that's what I was taught in college. That's what I taught in graduate school. That's what they taught in the PhD program. It's a chemical imbalance of the brain. But when I got to the state hospital, I'm watching what psychiatrists do. They never gave any kind of lab work or any kind of test to get a baseline of what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. And I thought that was pretty odd. So if it's a chemical imbalance and you're treating a chemical imbalance, you need to know what the imbalance is and what's out of balance to treat it. They never had a test. No kind of test exists to determine that. There's no lab work. There's no EEG. There's no EKG. It's completely fabricated. It's fabricated by this drug company to sell drugs. Right? So I went up to one psychiatrist one day. I said, where's the baseline? How do you know what's out of balance by how much? Oh, the pharmaceutical industry takes care of that. They send us all the graphs and the papers and the write-ups. And I'm like, it's like letting the fox loose in the hen house. What are you thinking? And of course, I didn't say that to him because most of them are so arrogant. And so the deal is, the chemical imbalance theory was completely made up. It's garbage. It was made up to sell drugs by Eli Lilly. Now, the drug industry owns education. They own the Congress, and they got the universities to teach, hey, mental illness is a biochemical imbalance of the brain. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. Not only that, they don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. They have no idea. I mean, it's completely fabricated, the whole thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Your book here, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, takes you through the entire history of psychiatry.
It's pretty ugly and still going on to this day.
Very ugly. The history of trying to cure and rid patients of paranoid schizophrenia, which is very alarming, such as drilling a hole into the patient's skull and pouring distilled alcohol into it, spinning machines, long-term standing, hydrotherapy, electroshock, right? Transorbital lobotomies, basically a bunch of torture devices that really did
Yeah,
absolutely no good. It seemed like their answer back then was just to turn the patients into zombies, which I think is exactly what they're trying to do today, but just
that,
in a
that's
different
right.
way, right?
That's exactly right. The drugs they're using today don't have the nasty side effects of all the ones that they're still dangerous. They're still some of the most dangerous drugs used in medicine today. These antipsychotic drugs, they with long-term use, they rot out the brain. They rot out the peripheral nervous system, and they found that when they started doing autopsies with patients from state hospitals. They saw their brains were shrunk up like walnuts. And the researchers go, hey, look at this is what we're finding. We think it's due to the psychiatric drugs. And of course, the psychiatric mafia and big pharma go, oh, no, 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 it's not us. It's not us. It's schizophrenia is doing that. So they went back and they started feeding those same antipsychotic drugs to monkeys and rats and mice, and their brain shrunk also. So these drugs that they're using today, they don't tell the patients this. I've never heard a psychiatrist tell a patient how dangerous these drugs are. They say, "Well, you're going to have blurry vision. You're going to feel sedated. You may have some sexual dysfunction. You might get nervous at times." They don't tell them all the bad, awful side effects, the dangerous side effects of these things. They're just not mentioned.
Well, not
But
only
with
that, they change it up and they switch up the concoction. Like when a patient comes back to the psychiatrist and was like, "Oh, that didn't work out for me," then they just switch it to something that's very similar, but just with a different name.
Yeah,
And
it's
you,
just they go round and round and round. They just
yeah.
keep giving different drugs until they find one that they think works the best. You know, there there is no test. That there is no test for any of these mental illnesses. None. There's no lab work. There's no EKG. There's no EEG. There's no uh, solid concrete test for any of these mental illnesses. They're all made up, just like that Eli Lilly lie was. They took segments of human behavior and they pathologized them. They put a label on them, and then now they can use them for insurance. Oh, this guy's got mathematics syndrome or whatever they put it down at, and they have to have a diagnosis for the insurance to pay. But I got off the topic a little bit. You were asking about the patterns. Okay, there's like 23 of them now, and I can run through them pretty quick.
Yeah.
Now, what these are is like if you had a magnet, a big magnet, you can't see that magnetic field. You can't smell it. You can't taste it. You can't feel it. You can't sense it with any of your senses. For all practical purposes, it doesn't exist as far as your senses are concerned. You get a bottle of ground up iron filings and you put that on the magnetic field. Now you can see it. Okay, that's what these patterns are. These are the operational definition of schizophrenia. These are the iron filings because schizophrenia is an energetic malady. It's not a physical malady. It's not caused by anything physical. It's caused by these energetic entities that psychiatry doesn't believe in. They don't want to believe in. They don't want a cure because their entire operation, their entire job depends on there not being a cure. So people could come back and keep getting these medicines, over and over and over again. Pay what, $150, $200 for a office visit, and then they're paying what, $800, $900 a month for these antipsychotic drugs. You go across the border here, 60 miles south of here, you go into Mexico, you can get those same drugs in a Mexican pharmacy made by the same pharmaceutical industry for $75 for a month's supply versus $800 here in the US, because the pharmaceutical industry has control of the Congress and they passed laws that you can't go over there and get these things. They don't want you bringing drugs back across the border.
And we're
So
one of the only countries in the world that is able to sell pharmaceutical commercials on TV.
yeah, that should be illegal.
Yep.
You know, so I mean, it's a racket. It's a friggin' racket, and they wonder why the American healthcare cost is so astronomical with them doing that.
Have
It's
you
all a
noticed
big,
that? Have you noticed that, Jerry? Like, have you watched TV recently and watched some of the commercials? It's always negativity. It's always some
yeah,
kind of disease. It's
right.
diabetes. It's cancer. So it's almost like they're wishing that upon the viewer. They're wanting the viewer
Well,
to be
yeah, they're
sick by pounding them in
right,
with all these diseases and illnesses.
and all this weird stuff that you never heard of before. These strange chemicals they come up with for these weird diseases that who had nobody ever heard of them. And then the weirdest ones is like, oh, ask your doctor if Zuba Baduba is good for you. It's like what? What is it? It must work. It's who's going to go in and ask their doctor if Zuba Zuba is good for them? I mean, they don't even tell you what it's for.
Yeah, they don't even tell
Yeah,
you what it is or what the illness even is.
yeah, it's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. You know,
It
but
seems like it's aimed at the older population that are, that go to the doctor all the time and go in for their monthly checkup all the time and have all these prescriptions, and then they might mention it to their doctor. You know what I mean? It almost seems like that kind of scam.
well,
Almost.
you got that. Now they're repurposing psychiatric drugs for other reasons. They make, oh well, it also works for this and that and this, and it's like I remember one advertisement they had out is like, well, if you got damage from COVID, we've got some antidepressants for you. It's like you can use it for COVID also. I mean, they don't care. Their bottom line is the money. They don't care.
Mm.
They're making what 4.7 billion. I have the exact amount they're making here somewhere.
Yeah, I think you have it in your book too, but that's 4 years old, I think. I'm sure that the numbers are even
Oh, they're
more
outrageous.
astronomical.
Yeah, they're like think it's either 47 billion or 4.7 billion dollars a year selling antipsychotic drugs. Billion. We're not talking million, we're talking billion. And these are some of the most dangerous drugs on the planet. And they're dishing them out to kids.
Oh, that's perfect because that goes right into my next question that I wanted to ask you about. Have you, in over 35 years of working with within the state prisons and mental hospitals, or even outside of these institutions, encountered a child with paranoid schizophrenia, or what they
Yes.
label as paranoid schizophrenia?
Yeah, and it surprised me. I mean, it really surprised me because working in the state hospital, I didn't work with children. Working in the state prison, I didn't work with children. When I got out, the last 10 years I spent doing psych crisis in hospital emergency rooms in all the big hospitals around town. That's where I started seeing the children. And yeah, they were young and they were hearing voices. Yeah.
Because that's the real question right there, and it really answers everything you need to know. If a child can develop paranoid schizophrenia, then that means we're dealing with something else other than trauma, which is not out of the realm of possibility that a child can also be traumatized as well. And that brings into a whole other realm of questioning as well, because I believe that trauma is a predecessor to
It
a
is.
lot of mental disorders. And if you
Yes.
couple that with illicit drug use like
Yep.
amphetamine or methamphetamine, which I also believe is a contribution into the factor. And during my study into the CIA's MK Ultra programs, I discovered that antidepressants, antipsychotics, amphetamine, which is Adderall and Ritalin, were all tested on the patients within the CIA's MK Ultra programs, which started in the early 50s until 85 when it was shut down, before these medications were given to the public, which then led me to a study that was done in 2014 to 2016 that showed that more than half the percent of the population, the US population, right, was on some form of pharmaceutical drug, which just that's just pharmaceutical drugs. Like, that's not accounting illicit drug use, right? And that number is super alarming
It
from
is.
just
It is.
2014 to 2016. No doubt that that number has jumped up by leaps and bounds since then. But when I looked up illicit drug use and how many people that use illicit drugs also suffer from mental disorders, and the staggering amount of 64% of illicit drug users have mental illness.
Yeah, amphetamine is one of the ones that I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on amphetamine than any other drug. And they start using it, and they start hearing voices, and they go, "Oh, that's just a hallucination. It's awful, but it'll go away," and it does. Then they use it again, it happens again, and then they come down and it goes away. That may happen a dozen or more times. So they're convinced that it's a hallucination. It'll go away when they come down. Then one day it doesn't, and they're hearing those voices for the rest of their lives, and they're just as psychotic as any of the patients in a mental hospital. It doesn't. That's it. They're done. The entity has moved in there. The prisoners used to call amphetamine the devil's drug.
I believe it.
So I finally found those stats for. Now this is just for antipsychotic drugs and antidepressant drugs. Okay. The global antipsychotic sales have soared to 14.54 billion in 2021, and estimated to soar to 15.5 billion in 2022. This is $1 billion of antipsychotic drugs. These are the drugs that rot out your brain, and they're giving them to kids now. Antidepressant market is expected to reach 15.98 or almost $16 billion by 2023. These drugs cure absolutely nothing. They just tamp down symptoms. They just blot it out. They don't cure anything. None of them. They don't solve any problems. They don't cure anything. And they're making this much money on them. You could see why they're just dishing them out by the truckload, because they're making a fortune on them. And kids don't matter. I mean, more than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs, and this was years ago. This was 2017. More now. So over 622,000 kids under the age of 5 are on psychiatric drugs. Over 80,000 are on ADHD drugs, which are amphetamines. They're giving these to kids.
Yep, that's exactly what they're doing. Amphetamines, Adderall, and Ritalin. When a kid is diagnosed with ADHD, they can't sit still, they can't pay attention, they automatically put them on Adderall or Ritalin. And in your book, your amazing journey into the psychotic mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower, I can't plug it enough. Please purchase the book. It's on Amazon. You state that 1 out of every 6 people in the U.S. is on some sort of psychological medication, which that was 4 or 5 years ago when this book came out. So it's got to be way more than that, which is already a staggering amount of people. Now, the children that you worked with that had developed paranoid schizophrenia, were they on Adderall? Were they on Ritalin? Were they already immersed in the psychological medication game?
Well, most of them. So I was working in the emergency room. Okay, so long-term chronic patients don't usually come there. They were usually first-time breaks where the parent brought them in and went, "What's going on with my kid? He's acting bizarre. He's doing this stuff." So it was there wasn't any history that I knew of. I mean, it was a new break. Now when they got out, they might put them on that, but if they're psychotic, putting them on an amphetamine doesn't make any sense to me. So they got over 38,000 kids are on antidepressants, over 85,000 on antipsychotic drugs. These are the ones that rot out your brain. Over 389,000 are on anti-anxiety drugs. They're drugging the kids senseless.
Which is really making it difficult for common sense and critical thinking to really prevail, right?
Yeah, you're sitting in the classroom, gorked out. Well, yeah, I'm feeling okay. Not thinking straight.
Now, at what point, Jerry, did you start to realize that this was something other than just a mental disorder? You have a few stories in your book, but for the people that aren't aware of your book or haven't read it, what was that point where you were like, huh, there's something more going on here? Was there an experience that you had with one of the patients in the prisons that
Yeah.
really just opened you up, that you were like, there's something more to this that people are not realizing?
Well, I started realizing that in the state hospital, but even then, I didn't know what the voices were. I didn't want to believe that they were demons or spirits. I mean, what I was thinking for decades was, well, this is just some faction of their subconscious mind that's kind of got berserk, you know. But then when I started talking to the prisoners about what these voices were saying back to them, they were coherent conversations. Like you're talking to somebody over a telephone. They were speaking the same language. Patients would argue with them. They'd fight with them. They'd scream at them. They'd get annoyed by them. They'd cuss at them. Uh, and I was privy to the conversation, and even part of it a lot of the times, where I got involved with the thing, and the voices didn't like me very much at all. So with these patterns, some 23 patterns here, I got to wondering what would happen if I started throwing a monkey wrench into those patterns, and just out of curiosity, I started coming up with stuff to do that would trip up these patterns, and was watching what they would do. So I always had a group of 10 or 12 inmates around me who were willing to tell me what the voices were telling them in real time. Okay, so I would tell them, okay, go home this week and try this. Come back next week and tell me what happened. All right. So that was constantly going on. And then as I was getting closer and closer to tripping them up and interfering with those patterns, these guys started coming back one at a time and saying, the voices don't like you. They don't like what you're doing. They don't like these exercises. They don't want me to come here. They want me to stay away from you. They're giving me trouble the whole time walking over here. They didn't want me coming back here. So I found, well, that's interesting. A hallucination doesn't want the guy to, come back and look at what they are. So here's all these things that didn't make any sense. So eventually, one after another, they came back and they were all telling me, the voices don't like what you're doing. They don't like these exercises. They don't want us taking part in that. They didn't want me coming here. And until virtually all of them were saying that. And went, well, that's interesting. And then one guy that I'd been working with for 6 months, he was getting better. The voices were coming less often. They were getting weaker. He turns around in the doorway of my office after the session, and he looks at me and he goes, you know what you're doing is dangerous, don't you? And it just kind of took me by surprise. I never thought about it. I never thought it was dangerous. I'm like, well, these voices are in your head. They're not in mine. They can't come out of your head. They can't get me. So I just tucked that in the back of my mind, and it didn't stop me. It was like I remembered it. I mean, it got my attention, but I didn't know exactly what it meant. I'd never been threatened by any of these guys, and that's even in the state hospital. I wasn't ever threatened by any of them. Matter of fact, I got along with them better than I did with most of the staff, most of the administrative staff. And then they upped the ante. Then one day again in the prison, one of the prisoners I was working with and was doing pretty good. He comes in, knocks on my door without a pass, and I open the door, and he goes, "The voices want to talk to you." And that never happened before. They never talked directly to me. It was always through the patient. So the voices would tell the patient something, the patient would tell me, and then I'd tell the patient, and they would communicate back to the voices. So the patient was like the translator. They had never spoken to me directly. And here's the one prisoner saying they want to talk to you directly. And I'm like, okay, come on in. So I brought him in, closed the door, and I said, what do they have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. You have no right to interfere with our way of life. And it was like, boom, my head exploded. And he's going, that wasn't me, that was them. He said, I swear to you, that wasn't me. They told me to say that to you. And uh, I was like, it was at that moment where I realized that these things weren't some faction of the subconscious mind. They were actual entities, and they were speaking to me, and they didn't like what I was doing. So that didn't stop me, but I was getting into uncharted territory. There's no books on this. There's no books on anybody who talked to psychotic voices or tried to figure out where they were or what they were. There's nothing on it. It's like virgin territory. So the only information I could find out similar to that was a South American shaman named Miguel Ruiz, who wrote The Voice of Knowledge. I was reading his book, and he started talking about these things, that they were also energy parasites. And after I finished reading his book, I went, they're the same thing. He's talking about the same thing that I'm seeing in the psychotic voices. So I brought the book into the prison, and this one guy I'd been working with for 6 months was doing great. He was getting better. The voices were getting weaker. They weren't coming as much. And I said, yeah, I have a book here by a shaman, and he was talking about what I think are the voices. I want to read it to you, and tell me what you think. So I started reading, and it got all the way down to the point where he was talking about them being energetic parasites, sucking the energy out of people, which is what I saw. The patients didn't know where their energy was going, but there was a one-to-one correspondence between the voices attacking them and their energy being gone. So after I got them reading the paragraph, I looked at him, and he's just staring at me like a zombie. I mean, his affect was totally different than when he came in the room. He's just this ghostly stare. And I went, uh-oh, he's going to attack. And I pushed my chair back against the wall just in case he did, so I could kick him back. Because the only guards they had in the medical unit were females. And they wouldn't have been of much use if something came out of this. So, I was getting ready, and he gets up very slowly, and he goes, I got to leave. And he shuffles out of the room, and I'm like, get out of here, go, get out, go, don't come back. And what happened was the wall behind my back started crackling. Okay, he's still sitting there. This is before he left. It started crackling like a arc welder. I don't know if you ever heard one of those, but a crack, 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 crack. It sounded just like an arc welder. And then it started going up the right wall of my office, and it's crackling the whole time. Crack, crack, crack. And I'm kind of splitting my attention between him and the crackling. And it's like, what's going on? And I couldn't smell anything. I couldn't see anything. There wasn't any sparks, but it sounded just like an arc welder. And it lasted a long time. It was like 4 or 5 minutes. It's crackling up the right-hand wall. Then it starts crackling across the ceiling over the patient's head. And I'm kind of splitting my attention between the crackling and him, because I was suspecting he was going to attack. So I didn't want to take my eyes off him for very long. It goes across the top over his head where I could watch him and the crackling at the same time. I didn't see anything. I didn't smell anything. You could only hear it. And then it came down the right wall, crackling all the way, and it jumped into a Rubbermaid trash can by my right leg, or my left leg. And I looked down in there, and there's nothing there. It's crackling, but there's nothing in there. So I'm like, I look up, and that's when he gets up and he goes, I gotta leave. And he shuffles out of the office. And I was totally freaked out. And I got up after he left, and I was relieved that he left and he didn't attack me. And I started tracing with my eyes the whole wall where that noise went. I didn't see any burn marks. I didn't see anything changed physically. So I went out in the hall to see if there was anything that could account for that noise. None of the doctors were in yet. None of the nurses were in yet. That whole hallway was empty. All the offices were closed and locked. So there was no explanation for this, no rational explanation. And my mind was blown. It's like I just went into shock. I closed the office. I didn't see anybody all day. I spent most of the day staring out the window going, where am I going? Where is this taking me? What's happening? It's uncharted territory as far as I was concerned.
Would
I
that
didn't know.
be a physical manifestation of the voices, in your opinion?
Well, I didn't know what it was to start with, but I called him back 3 months later, I think it was, maybe 4. I didn't want to see him for a long time. And I finally pulled him back in and come in. We did some small talk. I thought he would be destroyed. I mean, if something like that was buzzing around him, I thought he'd be destroyed. But he had a fair amount of energy. He looked good. And I said, "You look good." And he goes, "Yeah, I've been doing what you told me." So they haven't been able to take any ground, and I've just been able to hold them off. Okay, so I'm holding him at this level, but he was functional, and even though he was hearing them, and I said, "Come on in," and we did a little bit of small talk, and I said, "Did you hear that crackling when last time you were in my office?" And he goes, "Yeah, I heard it, but I was surprised you did." He's telling me he was surprised I heard it, and I'm like, "What was that?" And he said, "That was them." I said, "Them what? Them the voices?" He goes, "Yeah, they were the voices." And I said, right then, I kind of went, that was another shock, because I was thinking, like I said before, that they're going to be stuck in their heads. They can't come out and get me. But when that happened, they were out. I mean, they were out of his head and they were bombing around my office. And I'm like, if they can do that, what else can they do? And I was alarmed. I was seriously alarmed, because I had no roadmap to where this was all going. There was no. It was like entering an uncharted world and not having any idea what the rules or the regulations or how anything worked. It's like going to another planet, really. And
Yeah, because you're dealing with something completely different then, right? You're dealing with something that can take on a physical manifestation outside of the person's head. That's
yep,
a completely different
yep,
scenario than just dealing with the voices inside of someone else's head.
yes, it was completely different. It's like I had no idea they could do that. But when that happened, I'm like, okay, if they can do that, what else can they do? How much danger am I in? Yeah, I never really thought about giving up the search, but it made me pause. It's like, where is all this going? And how dangerous is it? And I'd never been attacked by a mental patient ever. So I didn't have any history of that. Some of my colleagues had, but I had. There was just once, and I triggered that on purpose. I mean, I didn't know how volatile this guy was, and I was kind of showing off for this psych intern that was coming in from medical school. I wanted her to see a little bit of what was behind this. And this guy he was an Apache, and he was in drunk, and he was in bad shape. And I tweaked him a little bit, and he picked up this sofa and he threw it at me. I mean, this heavy 150, 200-pound sofa. It clipped the top of my head. That taught me a lesson. But I've never been hurt by that. So they kind of scared me. And when this guy, I asked him, I said, "You looked really strange when you got up and left my office." I said, "What were the voices telling you then?" And he said, "They were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut." And I'm thinking, oh, he wouldn't do that. I worked with him for 6 months. He's doing good. He's holding his ground. He wouldn't do anything like that. So I asked him, I said, "Well, why didn't you do it?" He said, "I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one."
Wow.
So that was like, it was like, okay, this could be dangerous. Right.
Dr. Hugh wants to know, did your patients see any manifestations like you were talking about with the electricity running on the walls and on the ceilings, or were they just voices
Well,
mostly?
most of them were voices, but there were some who saw manifestations. They were usually shadow people, 3-dimensional black shadows. Some saw the eyes, some didn't. If they saw the eyes, they were in worse shape than those who didn't see the eyes. But they were usually either shadow people or black blobs. Um, uh, there's there's one story where demons coming out of the walls or demon faces in the walls, or seeing demons in the mirror. Um, that's not as common as just the voices themselves. You know, uh, hearing people outside the house, seeing people outside the house, um, interpreting, like if some people are laughing on the street, they interpret like they're laughing at them. Uh, they call it ideas of reference. Everything that's going on around them has some meaning to them. It revolves around them. They're being attacked. They're being interfered with, and it's coming in from all these other sources there. But yeah, there were some that were real nasty. There was one one fellow I interviewed on my website, jerrymarzinsky.com. There's a bunch of video. Hit the video button. His name is George. He's now working as a mechanical engineer, but he talks about the visions that he saw and what it turned out to be. And he didn't know it for years, was this mythical monster called Anubis that the Romans were familiar with. So he found a Roman medallion with a picture of this Anubis on it, from what, 5,000 years ago. And he goes, that's what I saw. That's what I saw come out of this dark cloud that I saw materialize in front of me. It was the exact same creature that this Roman medal had on it from thousands of years ago.
But then the question becomes, if he wouldn't have saw that medal, then would he have seen Anubis?
Yeah, he saw it before he found the medal. So he saw it years before and then he ran into the medal somewhere by accident, and he looked at it and he goes, that's the same thing I saw. So if you go to my website, you pull up that interview with Anonymous. I think he calls himself Anonymous. He'll tell you about it, the whole episode, what it was like to be in the psychiatric hospital, what he saw there, what the voices were doing. They gave him shock treatments. They filled him full of meds. He'll tell you the whole thing. So yeah, the auditory hallucinations are much more common than the visual hallucinations, but they're there.
Now I have a few more questions for you, Jerry, and I'm going to let you go. So what about the people that hear voices, and they claim that they have like out of this world experiences, right? That they absolutely can't be verified, like channelers or clairvoyant people, or spiritual mediums that hear other voices inside of their head that aren't necessarily negative. Would you consider that a mental illness, or what's going on there as a practicing psychotherapist?
No, but I would be very careful with that. Okay, Ouija boards are very dangerous. I've run into a number of patients over the years who started speaking to these things on a Ouija board, and they end up hearing them in their heads, and they don't go away. Okay? Now, with these other channeler guys, what these things like to do is they like to play like they're Jesus Christ or some angel or some guiding spirit that knows things that nobody else does. And once they get the person's attention and acceptance, then they turn, and show their true selves, which is very, very nasty. So
that's interesting, because in this community we have a lot of spiritual mediums and people that claim to channel extraterrestrials and the Pleiadians and the Galactic Federation and all this. I think it's all nonsense, but they claim it. They say that they're communicating with extraterrestrial beings, and I was just trying to get your thesis on what you think that is. Do you think that is a mental illness? Do you think that they're just making it up? Do you think that
no, I don't think it's a mental illness, but it could turn into one.
Okay.
Depending on what they're channeling. Yeah. Like I said, these things try to get the person's attention and acceptance. And once you accept them, then you're in trouble, and they'll usually turn on you. Now, there's other ones out there. There's other channelers. Um, there's people who speak to. Matter of fact, I just put up a video on my website of a nurse, an RN, who's been able to see these voices all her life. She's been able to see spirits all her life, and she did an internship on a psych ward, and she described what they looked like. They were like attachments to the patient's back, and she flicked one of them off. It fell on the floor, and she stamped it. So there's other ways of detecting them other than I just made contact with one woman who has a recording of these voices. Now, the whole time, psychiatry is going to be telling you, oh, they're hallucinations. Don't listen to any of this stuff. No. Like I said, go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. We didn't get into the patterns, but the patterns are the operational definition of what these things are. Anybody who works with schizophrenics, has a schizophrenic son or daughter, will be able to see these patterns. Okay? And if they're running patterns, the voices are not hallucinations. That's the bottom line. That's all there is to it.
Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but in your book, you basically come to the conclusion, and we've been talking about it here for almost an hour now, that demons are a negative thought form that can take control of the victim through the thought process and comes in the form of mental illness. Now, which comes first, Jerry, the mental illness or the negative thought forms?
Well, it's usually the negative thought forms. So they come in, if you believe what they're saying, because they sound just like your regular thoughts. So if you believe they're you, then you start acting like they're you, and you become them. All right. If you realize that they are coming in from the outside, that those thoughts don't belong to you, they don't fit in with your intention. They don't fit in with your conscience. Like one story I use is here in Arizona, we cut down the cactus with machetes to clear the yard. There's no, most people don't have grass because there's not enough water. So I was out there one day cutting this cactus back, and I have this beautiful white husky that doesn't belong in the desert, but she was like a rescue dog. She comes running by, and here's this voice booms through my head, cut her head off. And I'm like, that wasn't me, but I was shocked when I heard it. It was like, I would never do that. I don't want to even think about it. It gives me chills and willies just to think about it. Like, that was them. So we all hear them. They hit all of us. It's not just the schizophrenics. They hit the schizophrenics the hardest. They take over the schizophrenics, but they're constantly trying to get regular people to act on what they put into your head. And if you listen to it, you usually get into trouble. That's what they want. They want to generate that negative emotional energy. Look at the wars raging here now. They love that. That's a hog's trough for them. They want conflict.
Despair, division, conflict, pain, suffering.
Right.
It was interesting with the last episode that you and Lynn did with Jay, and she was talking about how these voices will literally make you want to do drugs so that they can infiltrate into your mind. And I thought that was so on point. I was like, holy crap, they probably would do something super sleazy like that to make you want to do drugs so that they can, or purposefully, I think the conversation was around being purposefully injured, like you were talking about with the entity on the back. It was hurting. I think she was speaking about her daughter and how her daughter was suffering from severe back pain. And that back pain was due to the attachment, and then the attachment was trying to make her go to the doctor to try and get on pain medication,
pain pills, right? See, and
unbelievable.
Then once they get you addicted, they never leave. They stay on the fringes of your psychic field, waiting for you to run into trouble, and then they go whisper in your ear, "Hey, go get some drugs, make you feel better." Same thing with alcoholics. That alcoholic spirit will never leave them it'll get weaker and weaker as it's pushed out to the periphery. But it's waiting for something bad to happen to the alcoholic, and then he has an excuse to go back and drink again, because they can't get high without a human body. So they need somebody to infest to get a high again. And a lot of them haven't gone over to the other side. They're just roaming around free here. They're in the bars. The bars are full of them.
Absolutely. That's why I completely stay away from bars. Nothing ever good ever happens at a bar, especially after 10 p.m., 11 p.m. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. I have one more question for you from an audience that I saw, an audience member that I saw earlier, I think, or it was Rebecca that talked about, because we've spent a lot of time talking about the voices and the negative aspects of the voices. And her question was, does the person want to heal in order to get rid of the voices, or can the voices automatically go away on their own?
Well, the person has to want to heal. They have to want to get rid of them. And in a number of cases, they do go on their own. If the person doesn't continue listening to them, if they block them out. I had one patient in the prison. He would mock them and laugh at them. They couldn't stand that. As soon as they come, he'd say, "You bunch of bozos, you're worthless, slime buckets, get out of here." He'd make fun of them, he'd laugh at them. And he was one of the highest functioning schizophrenics out there. They still kept trying to bother him. But Sherry came up with That's a Lie program, which that's what freed her. It takes a long time, a lot longer than some of these other methods. But it's basically 98% of what the voices say are lies. So you reply with "That's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie." So they can't get their hooks in you. Okay? And the times they are telling the truth, it's only to get around behind you and grab you from behind and turn on you later. So you can't trust any deal you make with them. You can't. I remember one patient where they told him that if he gouged out his eye, that they would go away and they would never come back. And he gouged out his eye. And as soon as he did that, they came back and started mocking him. Said, "You stupid fool, you listened to us. Now look at you. You look like a freak for life. People are going to look at you as a freak. They're going to stay away from you. You look like a monster." So this is the kind of gangsters you're dealing with. They act just like gangsters.
Yeah, I think that's why laughter is important, just like what you mentioned. They don't like laughter. They don't like you having fun. They don't like
That's right.
enjoyment. They don't like peace, So if
They
you
want you isolated. That's one of the first things they do to schizophrenic patients. Stay in your room. Don't go out. Don't talk to your parents. Anybody who tries to help them becomes an enemy. So here's all these, millions of parents all over the planet trying to help their kids, and the voices are looking at the parents as complete enemies. So they get the kid to act out so bad that the parents are just relieved when he goes into his room and stays away from them for a while. That's exactly what they want. They don't want any interference from patterns or parents or psychiatrists or anybody else. They just want the kid or the patient and them alone in a room by themselves, where they can keep working on them and working on them and working on them, taking more and more control every day. So the worst thing that schizophrenics could do is isolate themselves.
And that's what a mental facility is for isolation from the public and isolation from family members. And all
Yeah,
that's what state hospitals do,
yeah.
is isolate them from society.
Except for the crazy society, which makes them even worse in a lot of ways.
I agree so much, Jerry. Thanks so much for coming on my show. Really enjoyed the conversation. I would love to have you back on sometime. I could probably talk to you for another hour, but I'm going to let you go here. I know you got some things to do and I got some things to do, but can you let the people know where they can find you, plug your website, and where they can find your book, An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower?
Okay. Yeah, my website is jerrymarzinsky.com. Okay, we got hundreds of videos on there on this stuff. You can access the MACE energy method, therapy method, which will get rid of psychological problems better than it's an energetic therapy. Gets rid of psychological problems better than anything I've ever seen in my entire career. You know, has a little harder time with schizophrenics, but for stuff like depression and OCD and common psychological problems, it polishes them off within an hour in most cases.
Amazing. I highly recommend his book. The link to purchase it will be in the description of this video, and his website will also be in the description of this video for everyone else. Thanks for watching and listening. Much love to everyone in the chat. Good to see you guys. Thanks for being here. Please be sure to hit the thumbs up button to help the channel in the algorithm. Share, subscribe, hit the bell icon as well for notifications. And check out JFKX, Solving the Crime of the Century documentary on Amazon Prime Video. The 60th anniversary is coming up next month. So if you want to know what happened to JFK, and if you haven't checked it out yet, please do. The link is in the description as well. I will not be there will not be a show on Saturday, but I will see you guys on Tuesday of next week with Dr. David Morehouse. See you guys next time.